What is up, everybody? DSP here, and welcome to another edition of the Hateful Truth video game review series, where I give you maximum truth and minimum bullshit regarding the latest game releases. And today, we are going to talk about a game that, I'm going to be honest with everyone, it shocked me, it surprised me, it made me laugh, and I don't necessarily know if that's a good thing, because I'm not talking about a comedy. I'm talking about a game that is actually a direct sequel to a horror-based action platformer that came out just a few years ago that I played myself and found many flaws with but still enjoy. We're actually going to be talking about Castlevania Lords of Shadow 2. Now, this time around, if you remember the original game, I played on the PlayStation 3. This one I picked up on Xbox 360 because there were no rumors about frame rate issues or anything in the game on this console, and there were none. So at least up front I could say one big positive: no frame rate or graphical issues really in the game. The game ran pretty smoothly for the most part on the console. So let's talk about it. First of all, Castlevania Lords of Shadow 1 was an interesting take on the Castlevania series. It basically took those characters from the classic old storylines of the original Nintendo games and further, and twisted it into this almost over-encompassing storyline where Gabriel Belmont goes to try to kill off one of the Lords of Shadow, ends up fighting all these crazy mythical creatures from the games, some original characters as well. By the end of the game, ends up basically infecting himself with vampire-tainted blood in order to kill the final boss of the game, because he could not face the boss without it. Defeats the final boss, but then finds out, oh shit, guess what? He turns into Dracula, and this is actually the origin of Dracula. That was kind of the what the fuck moment at the end of the last game. You're like, no way, that's a cool twist. That's why there was no real Dracula in the game. But what ends up happening between the course of that game and this game is that there's more plot exposition. He almost kills his son, and therefore, to save his son's life, has to bite him. His son becomes Alucard. Now, Alucard also had a son whose name is Simon. And Simon Belmont in the game, Castlevania Lords of Shadow Mirror of Fate, which was a 3DS game that was just recently, a few months ago, ported to the Xbox 360 and PlayStation Network as a downloadable only title. Simon now attacks Castle Dracula, thinking that it was Dracula that killed his dad, not knowing that his dad eventually turned into Alucard, and he wants revenge. In that game, I'm sorry I'm giving you such plot exposition, but you have to explain it to make some more sense of this game. In that game, it's the story more of Alucard and Simon than it has anything to do with Dracula. In fact, Gabriel or Dracula doesn't show up till the end of that game as the final boss encounter. Castlevania Lords of Shadow 2 includes all that lore that's happened since the last game was released, but basically jumps you right to the end of where the last game was. If you don't remember, when the game ended, Dracula, ended up getting stuck for 300 years waiting for the coming of Satan because he wants to get revenge. And so basically he's in Castle Dracula just waning away. Remember, he's immortal, but he's not drinking blood. He wakes up in modern days, that's right, where there's technology, there's cars, there's televisions, there's the internet, all this stuff exists, and Castle Dracula somehow still exists in the middle of this big thriving city around him. He's awakened by one of his nemeses, who was the head of the Order, and is basically told, listen, I need your help. Enemies now need to team up because we need to basically fight against the powers of Satan. And that's where the game picks up. And this is immediately, as the game picks up, where the game goes off the rails and starts to fail. So, the reason that the Castlevania series has always had this gothic horror appeal is because it was set in older Gothic time, the times of Romania, where there were these big castles, there were knights, they always had this kind of medieval kind of feel to it. There was no modernization with guns and all kinds of stuff like that in it. But that's where this game goes, and that's where it really makes a mistake, in my opinion. Because what happens in Castlevania Lords of Shadow 2 is that the game is a dichotomy. Half the game is played in the real world, where you're actually going through cities, through decrepit buildings, you're fighting mutated humans because there's this gas that's let out through the world and turns all the humans into mutated generic enemies that you fight hundreds of throughout the course of the game. You gotta do platforming, you've gotta do all kinds of stuff that's very similar to the first game. But then you've got another half of the game where somehow Dracula's like in his own head. I know it makes no sense. It's never really explained in the game. He travels to and from Castle Dracula's dream world, where he's actually facing classic Castlevania enemies, including the Toy Man and others that have been in previous Castlevania games. And he's doing that and regaining all his abilities, because I guess what the story is, he's been asleep so long he lost all of his powers. So now he has to get his powers back by going through Castle Dracula in his mind and unlocking them. During this sequence, he meets dream versions of both his wife and his son Trevor, who, remember, Trevor, eventually he turned into Alucard, and it's never explained until the very end of the game why he doesn't realize that this can't be real, because you bit your son and turned him into Alucard, you dumbass. But it is explained near the end of the game, which I don't want to spoil what happened and why he can't remember that. But it's almost like you want to scream, because you like the parts in the castle you like. Wow, this feels like Castlevania. You're in a gothic setting, Castle Dracula, fighting monsters again, it feels great. Then they pull you out of that to go into the real world side of things, and you hate these portions of the game. Let me just give you an example. The game has Metal Gear Solid-like sneaking, and the plot line again is that Dracula's too weak from his 300 years of sleep that people can kill him with a normal gun. Now wait a minute. Dracula's immortal. The whole premise of the game is that Dracula can't die, and that's why the game is why he's so powerful and why he slept for 300 years to try to take on Satan. So why can he die to a simple gunshot? It doesn't make sense. It's just, you can suspend your disbelief to a certain reason, but when the game basically goes against its own lore as a cop-out as to why you have to sneak around and be this real wimpy Dracula, it doesn't work. And the bottom line is these segments of the game not only are incredibly annoying because they don't feel like Castlevania and they're really just out of place to be in this game, they make you feel like Dracula is a pussy. Like he's a pushover bitch, anyone could just run up, kick him in the fucking balls, and defeat Dracula. It's stupid. It was incredibly poorly planned the way that they do these segments. In addition, it's laughable. How do you beat them? Well, do you go through the shadows and sneak by? No. You have to turn into fucking rats. I'm not even kidding. Turn into rats and scurry through little corridors and passages. You have to throw vampire bats at your enemies to distract them. You can't hurt them, but you can distract them. It's fucking laughable. And that vein of just comedy actually continues through the entire course of the game with some of the most overblown set pieces, just things that they've done here with this game. I thought at some points Michael Bay was directing because it was that fucking stupid and over the top. So for example, did you ever think that in a Castlevania game it would be the time when Dracula's in modern day and he's actually doing scaling and platforming on the top of a moving train, but he has to dodge left and right to dodge lights that might hit his head as the train is moving through the tunnel? You bet you always thought that that would be in a Castlevania game, right? Or how about the segment where Dracula needs to get across the street but he has none of his powers. So he has to light a giant fuel canister on fire, stand on top of it like a surfer, and like a stupid superhero, as the canister explodes, he flies across the street comically to land inside the top of the building over there. This game makes Dracula and Castlevania jump the shark. And that's the worst part of it, is that there are parts of this game that are good. Anything that's in Castle Dracula you're loving, but there's a whole other half of the game that's like, what the fuck were they thinking? None of this kind of shit was in the first game. Why the hell is it in the game? And when you really get down to it, you have to figure out what happened with the game. They actually have been doing interviews with the director and lead guy who's in charge of this game, and he's actually commented, and I'm not kidding you, I'm not making this up, he said, Castlevania is not really my cup of tea. And when people question him about the creative direction of this game, he basically gave dickish remarks and comments, basically saying, well, we're done with this with Castlevania now, so we're not worrying about it anymore, we're moving on to other projects. So the bottom line is, it seems to me that the director was incredibly disinterested in the game, so he just had people slap together a bunch of shit rather than actually put some time into making another full Lords of Shadow game. What you get is half a game, and then really stupid shit. And it's horrible that they did that. It really is. It's unfortunate. Now, the combat of the game, which of course is the meat and potatoes of it, when it comes down to it, you want to do the combat, is almost identical, and I shit you not, to the combat from Castlevania Lords of Shadow 1. In fact, a lot of the abilities almost have the same animations. Of course, there's tweaks, so he's Dracula now. He doesn't have his Belmont whip anymore, but he can control his blood to look like a whip and do some of the same exact unlockable attacks that were in the original game. Eventually, he gets the same exact double jump. He gets the same exact healing abilities, which is blue. In this case, they call it the Void Sword. If you attack with that, you gain your energy back. If he has orange abilities, which are called Chaos Magic, so if you do that, you can break through powerful armor. It's the same stuff from the first game. Now, of course, it is refined a little bit. I believe the counter-attacking system was actually made to be a little bit easier, because in the first game, I couldn't get it at all. In this game, I kind of got it, and I ended up doing it. Not all the time, but at least I'd say about 50% of the time that I wanted to counterattack, I could. So at least in that regards, they improved it a little bit. Again, the problem is you might be into the combat, you're loving it, then you get tossed into the real world side of things, and you're bored again because the game sucks in those portions. In addition, one of the major gripes that I had with the original game remains. Every fucking character in Castlevania Lords of Shadow 2 has super armor. And I talked about it in the old review, and I'm going to talk about it in this one. In an action-adventure hack-and-slash combat game where you want things to be free-flowing and feel like you really have a powerful character who, if you do the right things, you use the right combos on the right enemy type, can be incredibly powerful, you can't have enemies that at a moment's notice say, oh, guess what? Even though you've hit me 42 times and I'm about to die, oh, I have an animation where I'm invincible and I take no damage, so I punch right through it and interrupt your combo. No, it's not fun, it's not challenging, it's fucking annoying. It breaks up the fun of free-flowing combat that I think they were originally intending for the game, and normal little rinky-dink enemies who you fight 500 of in the game shouldn't be punching through Dracula's multi-hit combo. It makes you feel like a fucking pussy. And that's another thing, Dracula takes incredible amounts of damage in this game. 2-3 hits, you better run for cover, or you better be ready to heal with that void ability, or there's also items you find in the game that you can drink, like healing potions. You better be ready, because if you get hit a few times, you're fucked. So, just a lot of frustrations of the game. To me, when the game was all said and done, the ending of the game, including the final boss fight, are incredibly unrewarding and unsatisfying after going through all this epic saga of the game. And by the way, the game is just as long as the first one. I just want to throw that out there. The game is really long, but the problem is half the game you're going to hate. The parts that you're going to love, you're going to feel high highs, and then when you get to a sneaking portion or one of these really dumb, oh, ride a train or do one of these things that's so out of character for Dracula, you're going to have a low low. And they really find a hard time to find a balance. But when you finally get to the end of this game, it's a journey. You know, you spent 10, 12, 14 hours on it. Wow, where's my final resolution? You get an ending, but it's kind of a wimpy one, and it's kind of a cop-out, and really you're kind of like, that's it? That's how it ends. The problem is the game ends almost open-ended, where anything can happen. They could probably make another sequel, but the director, again, the guy who's in charge, basically said, I have no interest, we have no interest, Lords of Shadow is dead at this point. So, hopefully, this is the end of the Lords of Shadow series, and I'm sad to say that, because when I beat part 1, I actually was hopeful for the series, that maybe it would go on longer. And they had Mirror of Fate, which was a great 3DS game that was really good, fit into the lore of the game. I had no complaints, I thought that was an amazing game. This game sucks, because half of it sucks. So it's this simple. I'm going to be the fairest person on the planet. Here you go. You ready? It's a long game. Of course, there's no multiplayer. I don't think the game needed multiplayer. That was a good design choice. Good reactive controls, responsive controls, free-flowing combat, that's fun. But it is very similar to the first game with a few refinements. The entire side of the game where you're fighting these enemies, pretty much in Castle Dracula, is fun as hell. The other half of the game, where you're sneaking, where you're weak, where you're wimpy, where you're doing things completely out of character for Dracula, completely jumping the shark on the Castlevania series, sucks dick. So, I'm going to be honest, half great, half shit, smack them together, what do you get? 5 out of 10. This game is a 5 out of 10, because it doesn't deserve any more than that. Half the game is great, you get 5 points, half the game sucks, you get 0 points, 5 out of 10. And that's my definitive score on Castlevania Lords of Shadow 2. It's almost like the guys didn't give a fuck about half the game. It definitely shows, okay? And if you watch a playthrough, If you don't even play the game, you have to at least watch a playthrough to see one of the scenes where he has to sneak around like a little wimpy Metal Gear Solid reject, and the scene where he's riding the goddamn gas canister. Because you'll split your fucking sides laughing. At the end of the game, I was like, gee, I know, they'll have a DLC where because now you're in modern times and you're so wimpy, you'll walk to fucking Starbucks and get your caramel macchiato, grab yourself a fucking bear crawler, sit back at home on your iPad, download the fucking app, playing the apps, Dracula in his castle, playing with apps and fucking watching DVR TV and hilarious clips on YouTube and drinking coffee. That's where the game should be going, right? Because we're in modern times now, and that's basically what they're telling you. It's fucking stupid as shit. It's a dumb premise. I think the guy really just wanted out of the series. He said, let me make a real shit kind of scenario to get out of the series. That's what he did. That's a shame, because if this was done right, I really feel this could have been a huge legacy of games. The first game was done well with a few things that were rough around the edges that once fixed could have made the series great. This one tanks the series basically, and that's unfortunate to see in this day and age. 5 out of 10 for Castlevania Lords of Shadow 2. Alright. Thank you everyone for watching this episode of The Hateful Truth. We're going to wrap this one up. I hope you found it full of maximum truth and minimum bullshit, and now you know a little bit more about this game and whether or not you want to check it out. And I'll see you next time for another honest review on The Hateful Truth. Peace out everyone. Have a good night. I'll see you later.